So I struggle with this all the time. Is a quick decision a good decision?
No.
Is no straight away no. Is no decision a bad decision? Decisions, man, they're tough for us.
Oh, look, if I'm not making a quick decision, I'm stuck in the freeze phase of, what if I make the wrong decision, right?
Oh, the analysis paralysis.
Yes. Because it can be so temperamental based off of the situation.
Yeah. And I think for neurodivergent people, this is something a lot of us struggle with around what is seen to be an impulsive decision and saying yes before our brain catches up, or saying yes to something that maybe really isn't a great idea, or underestimating how big something is, and then being stuck with that decision forever and ever. And so, like, if I break it down and I think about it, like, why do so many of us struggle with this and appearing to be impulsive in our decision making? Is, to me, impulsive decision making comes down to three things. One, it can be hard for us to understand the full impact of our decisions before we make them. There are some differences there that make that tricky. Two, often we make a quick decision because the present moment is feeling really uncomfortable. And we say yes or no, most often yes, to kind of reduce that feeling of unease in ourselves. And then the third one is we seem to, once we make a decision, get stuck with it and find it really difficult to back out or to change our mind or to reverse that decision.
Yeah, especially if we feel like we've got the weight of somebody else's expectations hanging over us, or if we're finding that we feel like we have to emotionally manage somebody else in that moment because we don't want to either disappoint them or for them to call us another label in their heads.
Exactly. You're unreliable, you're a flake, all of those different things, that can come up. So, yeah. But let's start at the start, like why it is hard for us to understand the full impact of our decisions or the consequences of our decisions before we make them. So if you're out there and you're like, I have just agreed to step into a volunteer position and do or I've agreed to do some additional work in my place of employment, or I've agreed to do a large project. Host family Christmas. Yes. The big social events, right? And this one often comes from a place as well of trying to help other people out, and sort of trying to do the right thing by everyone else. But it is hard for us to understand the full impact of our decisions before we make them. So we know prefrontal cortex and those type of things in our brain are a little bit different. We know time blindness exists, right? But in the context of decision making, essentially what that is unless something is concrete and visible in front of us, it can be hard for us to estimate or understand. So like let's take that hosting family Christmas, right? You go, yes, I will host family Christmas, probably because nobody else has. And you go, yeah, that's fine. And yes, I can do that in 2 weeks' time. But then when you actually take the time to step away and you write the list and you work out all of the different things you need to do, you suddenly realize that actually 2 weeks is not enough time to do that, or you don't have the resources or you don't have the money, but you've committed to it. So it can be really, really hard for us to understand. I'll say yes to the outcome, but I'm not work out essentially what the detail is that sits beneath that. That is tough.
Yeah, especially in our case where I think about 3 weeks out, we decided to renovate the kitchen and we decided to do it ourselves. So often we'd be, thinking that it was just as simple as getting a couple of sledgehammers and knocking some stuff out. But of course, in an older house, you sort of tend to find problem upon problem sort of stacked on top of each other. And so for us, we were up until sort of 1 a.m., literally like hammering pieces of wood back into place or trying to redo the flooring.
Oh, the flooring. And I remember
10 and a 10.
Layer upon layer upon layer, it just kept giving. And I remember at the time you called me and you're like, we're going to host family Christmas. And I'm like, and we're going to renovate our kitchen. I'm like, babe, this is not a great idea.
I kind of feel like that whole phrase, like biting off more than you can chew, was literally built for people like us. And that's the thing, right, is that in that moment, I remember thinking, all right, it's like my generation's turn to step up. We've got the space. Let's do it. Let's take the pressure off some of the older generation who've been doing it for decades.
Yeah.
And,
Lovely intent.
Yeah. Well, it was the intent. It was to be helpful. It was to do my part and do our part. But it was also, I guess, the realization that came later, much, much later, about how much work was actually involved. And then when you layer on family expectation of setting or, having glasses instead of plastic glasses outside or something along those lines, like you're dealing with a lot, and it comes from, trying to second guess other people's expectation and then overthinking and then, shooting for the stars, or just sort of having to come back to a place of, well, what's good enough? It doesn't matter that the napkins are paper instead of cloth. Well, no. And if someone wants to complain about that, they can leave.
Sure. And it's so cool too, right? You've talked about the other two things that happen in that why it's hard space, right? Is for us the delay discounting too, right? We get the idea of what it's going to feel like and that expectation of how amazing will it be to have family Christmas in our house with a beautifully renovated kitchen, and you get this sort of a vision in your head of what it will look like, but not necessarily thinking about the cost or the consequence, associated with that.
Well, and then the other one you've got going on at the time.
Everything else that you've got going on. Exactly. Like it's sort of, it's like, no, that's the outcome, and sort of focusing on that. And also as well, cognitive switching for us can be difficult as well, right? We've talked about monotropism a lot, but that ability when we're sort of set on an outcome and this is what it's going to look and feel like, to then peel back those layers and to actually be able to go, well, that wasn't actually a complete decision is what I call it now. So it's sort of going, at the time decision. It seemed like a good idea, but we've now investigated the possibility of putting a new kitchen in. That ain't going to happen, so actually we need to revisit it, but that's hard for our brains to do, or cloth versus paper napkins, all of those different things. So for us, it's really, really hard to understand the full impact of what we're saying yes to before we do. The second reason we say yes is a lot around this discomfort in the moment, and you'll probably relate with a lot of these ones too, right? Is we've got that discomfort in the moment can come from social pressures. So other people's expectations, waiting for somebody to say yes, waiting for somebody else to put their hand up, worried that people are going to think you're not contributing or you don't like them or you're not involved, all of that internal dialogue, which causes us to feel uncomfortable, right? It's not a pleasant feeling when we've got that, and we've got a lot of thoughts and they're busy and loud. So, we've got all of these narratives going on. Someone's just said, can you go pick up something for dinner, or would you like to go out for dinner this weekend? And you're in your head, you're weighing up the yes, the no, the what will they think, either way, so you go, sure, yes. You're like, but I actually hate busy and loud restaurants, and I've already got 4 other social engagements this weekend. But in the moment, it's more comfortable to say yes than no. The other one is the urgency priority. So for us, our brains, again, we've talked about this before, but our brains have a hard time prioritizing. So for us, a lot of times everything's of equal importance and urgency. So when you've got a lot of thoughts and they're competing, it's just making a decision kind of helps, then everything then falls into priority behind it. So often it's like everything feels urgent and uncertainty. So it is hard to live in an uncertain situation, to not have the data, to not know what's coming next. And particularly for autistic people, that uncertainty is really, really hard. So having a yes, even if it's a bad yes, even if it means I know I've said yes to going out to dinner and I really don't want to do it, and there's those 20 other commitments on this weekend, at least I know what's coming, as opposed to not making a decision, either way. So in that moment, we're feeling all these things in our body. It can be hard to interpret what's happening. And so suddenly you notice the word yes is coming out of your mouth. And it's only once it comes out, we say it, we then realize that probably it wasn't a great idea.
And I think you touched on it before, right? It's feeling locked into your decision.
Yeah.
And we often have this kind of like, well, I've said yes and I can't back out now, because if I back out, then again, those words that you mentioned before, flakiness comes up, oh, you're unreliable. And it's like, well, actually, and then I find I've sort of, I don't know about you, but finding myself in these situations where I have to elaborate as to why. I give these, long-winded, like, oh, because I've got this on and that on and that, and I just didn't think of this, and I'm really, and it becomes this huge apology speech, when in reality, often it can just be a simple explanation of, well, actually, I've overloaded myself. I didn't realize, can we do this another time? Or, we've talked about before that the no doesn't have to be a definitive no. It can be not this weekend, or can it be another time, or can we renegotiate, the boundaries of whatever the expectations are for me in here.
Exactly. Can it be pizza on the couch instead, right? Like, it's so many options. And again, that's the third part, right, is we get stuck in bad decisions. And that can come from, again, that monotropism and that getting fixed on an outcome or the answer or the commitment, or that's what I've said. And we can be very literal in our brains as well. So I've said yes to dinner on Saturday at the pub. And so that's the outcome, as opposed to being able to look at it and go, where is their flexibility for that in the decision? So yes, the intent is that I see my friend, but there are other ways I can do that. It doesn't have to be this weekend, but we can get very, very fixed on it needs to be done that way. So fixed on the outcome and the process, when often the process is up for negotiation. Loading into that often RSD or rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or even just having a higher level of rejection and trauma associated with that in our lives, means that often we end up with people pleasing and wanting to say yes, and really fearful and worried about letting people down. And then we have these two drivers in our head, and then the added gift of rumination and thought looping. So helpful, brain. Thank you very much for that one. Where we then start building these things up bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger in our head, when actually it could just be a simple no. And, bad news does not get better with time. So if it's literally in the same conversation, it's yes, I'm going to go to dinner. And then you can say, actually, I've just realized I've double booked myself this weekend. I've said yes. Can we do it another time? Can we do it another way? It's better then, rather than 20 minutes before. Or just not showing up.
Well, it's also a respectful thing too, right? Is that you're giving people the opportunity well ahead of time in order to make other plans, as opposed to on the day it was just like, you know what, I've decided I can't do it. And then I think people feel more put out because they've put in planning and time and thought and effort and whatever the case may be. And then it appears that you're bailing on them last minute. And that's how it appears on the outside, whereas internally it might have taken a week to get to that point because you were so fearful of the potential reaction or the outcome or something along those lines. And, just as you were saying that too, right? I think one of the thoughts that memories that sprang to mind was when you were still living in Melbourne, and there was this opportunity, and we were sort of heading out, and I think we were trying to amp each other up because we thought that that's what the other person wanted.
Yes.
And it got to a point where I think one of us just said, oh, look, I'm not really in the mood for going out tonight. Do you mind if I stay home? And I'm like, I don't really want to go out tonight either. I thought you did. Yeah. There was this moment where we just took this collective because we didn't have to go out.
Yeah, let's get a DVD and some takeaway instead, and we'll watch that. And that often happens too, right? So often, we get stuck on that's the answer, or that's what the other person wants. And, and I love that as a story, to reflect on that. Chances are we don't ever know what the other person's thinking, and they might be just as relieved as you. And this one really comes up a lot of times in things like, volunteering, agreeing to take on additional responsibilities at work, agreeing on to take on additional responsibilities at home. We are often people that have a real strong fairness and equity driver. We want to help out other people. We do help without thinking. And so often we commit to bigger things, and then in reality it's just like, nope. And I see this all the time with volunteering. People go, yes, I desperately want to help. Yes, I'll commit to doing that. And then don't follow through on it. And it's not that the person's done anything wrong, but often it's we commit to the idea, or we say yes in the moment. We impulsively do that, and then we have to sit with the reality of it. And then the shame and the guilt and everything else builds up so big that we gradually just stop showing up, and, or we sort of kind of ghost. we ghost the commitment, whatever that is, and then that feeds into that flaky narrative, or that unreliable narrative, or the bad friend, narrative, and it sort of discounts everything else. So impulsive decision making is really, really hard, but a quick reflection and backing out of a commitment is a much, much better option.
Yeah. Especially, and I feel like, again, we've talked about the load, whether it's the emotional load, the mental load, the physical load, like they all count and they all add up and pile up on that plate that we're holding. And the more we add to it, obviously, the heavier that gets. But it's very difficult sometimes to see how much we are holding. And one of the realizations I've had recently is it's also very difficult to see how much emotional load we're holding for others, how much space we're holding for others. And so where that happens as well, and then somebody says, oh, hey, I'm moving. Can you help me move this weekend, or whatever the case may be, or they're going through a horrific breakup or something along those lines. It can be, I've seen it sort of time and time again. We want to leap in there. We want to help. We want to save them. We want to, be that person that they can rely on, while we're also dealing with everything else that we have on that plate, that metaphorical plate. And so it's also okay if someone's going through something really horrible, or, if they're moving house or things like that. We all know that one person that, wants or needs help. But it's also okay to say, look, I can only give you an hour or two, or whatever the case may be. You don't have to be there for the whole day. They're not expecting you to move the whole house. And similar for the friend who is going through a terrible breakup, you don't have to be there day and night for them. You don't have to be on call. And so understanding where your boundaries are in those situations, when you actually write it down. I'm a visual person, right? Like if I write it down, I'm like, okay, this is what I've got going on with work, and this is what I've got going on with study and friends and family and all the rest of it. And I look at it and I go, wow, that's a lot. Can I take on something else? Yes or no, or maybe in a week, so having that visual, like a whiteboard or something that you can see, to be like, this is everything I'm carrying. And if other people in the household can also see, like, this is everything you've got going on, there's also the understanding that, maybe asking you to, do something else might not be the best time right now.
Yeah. And every time I support clients with this and they're struggling with it, there's just 3 simple things that we do. One is, in the moment, is not commit, and practicing that muscle to say and recognize what the person's saying. So first thing you can do is say, I hear you need help with X, or you're looking for someone else. I'll look into what I can do and come back to you.
I love that.
Right? So taking it away from the moment, before, to remove some of that urgency. Then knowing that our brains find it difficult to estimate and to size, whatever means works for you, whether that's talking it out with somebody else, as you said, visually, whiteboarding it, whatever that might be, but looking at those items and seeing what you can help with, what you can't help with, and what is comfortable and okay for you in the context of things. And then 3 is then setting a very boundaried response in relation to what you are able to do and aren't able to do. And it's okay to say, not like that, not this way, and focus on, I can help you with X, but it might be, as you said, 2 hours. It might be next weekend instead of this weekend. It might be hosting dinner at your house, instead of heading out to a busy venue. So there's a lot of those ways, but if we take that heat out of the moment and give our brains a chance and time to catch up, then usually we're more likely to make a better decision.
Yeah. And one of the other thoughts that just occurred to me is that, sometimes, somebody will be like, oh, do you want to catch up and, meet up for coffee this weekend? And if your first thought is, I don't actually like you as a person, I've realized I've just been saying yes to hanging out all this time because you keep following up, it's also okay to say no, and then carefully exit out of that relationship or friendship if you want to as well. It just popped into my head, the little ADHD impulse to be like, also sometimes you just don't like the person, and that's okay too.
Okay, and that's okay too, exactly. So whether it's the person, place, or situation, it's what's making you feel uncomfortable, and then finding a way of doing whatever it is that does make you feel comfortable, that honors you and honors your preferences. So that's a real nutshell view of impulsivity and decision making.
Yeah, we've all done it. We've all been there. You're not alone, but there are definitely ways to make it less of an issue in the future for all of us.
Absolutely. So if you've liked what you've heard, like and subscribe for more. We'll post again next week. And until then, stay spicy.
Stay spicy.
You're listening to the NeuroSpice Life podcast
with Hanna and Freya, besties, brains, and more.
If you've enjoyed listening, follow us on YouTube or your favourite podcast app and share it with someone else who knows the sting of a sticky label.
We'll see you next time. Until then, stay spicy, stay wonderful.